Okay, so my name is Maros and I work at FRINX. And yes, we do use Conductor at FRINX. And today I would like to talk a little bit about, excuse me, what we actually do at FRINX and why we do need a workflow engine and how we ended up using Conductor. I'll share some details about how we actually use Conductor within our architecture. And hopefully I can do a quick live demo showcasing some of the pieces. And depending on the time, we can go into specific enhancements done to Conductor at FRINX. So we will see about that. So a little bit of background about FRINX and what we do. So at FRINX, we deal with network automation. We build and provide software that can help automate use cases in the communications network. And that is, a pretty broad domain. But here are some of the example use cases that we actually deal with. So a good example is L3 VPN or L2 VPN automation. So imagine our customer could be an ISP, Internet Services Provider company, and they have their own customers. And their customers might be interested in connecting their different branches as if they were on the same network. And to do that, the ISP has an offering called L2 VPN or L3 VPN service, and they can actually go and locate their devices, submit a bunch of configuration, change the actual configuration on routers, switches, and other devices, and enable that connectivity. And in the past, that would typically happen manually, right? So you would have, excuse me, network engineers actually locating the correct routers, submitting the configuration, changing the switch configuration, and many other devices possibly, and recording all of that somewhere, right? So in the past, that used to be a manual process quite often. So that is exactly what we are trying to help with, right? Help automate such use cases, but also other similar use cases within the networking domain. And to do that, we actually developed a piece of software called Uniconfig. And Uniconfig is a network controller. And that's actually the first thing that we started working on, and we still work on that quite heavily. It's actually the core of what we do here at FRINX. So this is a network controller that sits on top of the network, on top of the devices. It actually talks to the devices, whether that's a single vendor or a multi-vendor network, whether that's CLI, NetConf, GNMI, or other management protocol. It sits on top of that and tries to abstract as much of the ugliness inside the network as possible, right? So it provides clean REST APIs and abstracts as much as possible and unifies as much as possible from all those devices, and also provides some safety, right? So it can actually deploy configuration to a segment of a network in a transactional manner, right? So this is a clearly scoped network controller. And as I said, this was the first thing that we built and that we provided to our customers. But on its own, it's just a tool that sits on top of the network. It can help alleviate some of the pain points, but it's just one piece. And as we moved on and as our use cases expanded, we had to develop other services as well, other supporting services, something like a device inventory, service inventory, or resource management. Those are standalone services that we also work on, we also provide, and they participate in the automation of use cases mentioned before. So, we went from a single network controller to multiple services, and working with specific customers, there are specific third-party systems that we also have to talk to, right? So it was getting more and more complex. And at that time, that was several years ago, we actually realized that we need something that would help us integrate all of those moving parts. We didn't quite know at that time that what we actually needed, right? We were thinking about building a framework from scratch that would sit in the middle We were thinking about integrating that into the network controller, but we were not happy about either. And at that time, we learned about Conductor. And Conductor actually helped us frame this problem a little better. It helped us frame the microservices aspect, right? We can write reusable pieces of code, call them microservices, and we can actually orchestrate them or string them together with the workflow. And it seemed like a good fit for our problem. So it seemed like Conductor can become the central part for automating the use cases that we need to automate and integrate all the services that we need to talk to in the process. So from the high perspective, it looked like a great match, and it actually helped us frame the problem a little better. So that was one part of why we liked Conductor, but there were also technical aspects, right? So we started looking at Conductor a little closer, and these are the top technical things that we liked about Conductor as well. So there was a huge technological overlap, namely Java and Postgres. We use the same technologies in the network controller. So we have engineers that can deal with that. So that was a huge plus. We also liked the architecture and the operational model of Conductor. It was fairly understandable, right? We understood there's Conductor server that orchestrates the workflows. It uses primary and index database. There are workers that are polling for work, and that's pretty much it, right? So we thought that we could handle that. We could be able to deploy that, operate that, and actually use for what we needed to use it for. We also like the JSON-based DSL for workflow definitions, right? So a workflow can be represented as a JSON. It can be imported, exported. It can be programmatically scanned. It can be, many things could be done on top of that DSL. So we like that aspect of it as well. The extensibility. So it is very easy to just write a function in Python, JavaScript, Java, or whatever, put it into a container, run it, point it to Conductor, and that's it, right? You have a new custom worker, a new custom task that you can immediately use in your workflow. So the extensibility part was also really, really nice. And last but not least, the scalability aspect of the workers. You could just easily, deploy additional containers with the same worker, and there you go. You have more capacity to run your workflows. So those are the technical things that we also really like. And after that, we, started looking even more closely at Conductor. First, we actually had to consider alternatives, right? Once we realized that workflows would be a good match, we were looking at other alternatives as well, like BPMN, but BPMN seemed pretty heavyweight and more focused on the human side of things that we more than we needed, and we didn't really we couldn't imagine how we would actually run an execution engine for BPMN. And we also considered Cadence, but there was further technologically there was less of a technological overlap when compared to Conductor. So basically Conductor won, and since then we've been using Conductor with the services that we provide. And how we actually do that, let me quickly talk about that. So we always deploy our services on premise. So our customers actually deploy our software on their premises. And to do that, we have created a project called FRINX Machine. And FRINX Machine is all the setup and installation scripts, putting it all together. It's based on Docker Swarm, and it contains the Conductor with its dependencies. It contains our FRINX services and a bunch of additional smaller items. like specific workers, right? Workers specific to our services. A UI that we have built for all of that. An API gateway, obviously, and a small proxy on top of Conductor that makes up for some of the missing features in Conductor that have been missing or are still missing. And we decided to go with Docker Swarm instead of something like Kubernetes because, as I mentioned, we always deploy, so far we have always deployed on-premise with customers. So it's much, much easier to manage a Docker Swarm deployment than something like Kubernetes. Having said that, we are also looking at that option of something like a hybrid cloud. But this is typically what we do. And FRINX machine is actually an open source project. It's on GitHub under FRINX.io. So feel free to check that out. You can actually download it, install it, deploy it. You will be limited by the license to the network controller piece, but other than that, it is out there. As you may have noticed, I have mentioned Postgres a couple times. So we actually use Postgres instead of Dynamite as the primary database. It's much easier for us to use Postgres because we use Postgres for other services as well. And also when we looked at Dynamite and like the default deployment model between Dynamite and Conductor, especially when scaling that out, that was something that we actually didn't want to go into. And there were some downsides to that operationally. So we realized that for us, it would be much, much easier to work with Postgres. We tested the performance. We did a relatively simple benchmark between Dynamite, Postgres, and MySQL, and Postgres looked good. We did some performance improvements to the Postgres driver in Conductor. And yeah, we got pretty good results out of that. Definitely sufficient for what we do. Another thing I mentioned is a proxy. So that's an HTTP proxy in front of Conductor that is adding a couple of useful additional features, like multi-tenancy. We have lightweight multi-tenancy there, a role-based access control. We also handle via the proxy. We have added a labeling tool, so we can more easily distinguish different categories of workflows. And also, we can create a hierarchical view of workflow executions. So when we're doing more parent and sub workflow, if you have multiple cases like that, it's much easier to look through that with the hierarchical view. And I also mentioned custom UI. So we have a custom UI that sits in front of all of our services, but it also sits in front of Conductor. So we have a custom UI for Conductor that can do some nice things. And that is actually something I wanted to show right now. So let me just switch. Oops. Let me just switch to a deployment of FRINX machine. So this is FRINX machine running in some VM somewhere. And this is our dashboard, and you can go through all the services that we have. But we are right now interested in the Conductor facing UI. So let's start with exploring workflow definitions. So this is a simple view for all the workflow definitions in the system. They are listed on the left. This is the labeling system that I mentioned. All right. So if I want to see just the inventory workflows, I can just select that label. I can add additional labels and just select a specific, subset of workflows that I might be interested in. We also create something like a tree view, so we can keep track of dependencies between workflows. So if workflow A uses workflow B as a sub workflow, you can see it from here, and you should not be allowed to just delete workflow that's in use. And there's a bunch of controls on the right, so we can read the workflow definition, execute the workflow, we can schedule the workflow, and some other useful things. So this is just the definition view. we have a nice little feature called Workflow Builder. So let me just create a sample workflow here. And this is a tool that lets you visually build a workflow definition, right? After you are done, it exports the JSON, loads it into Conductor, and you can use that workflow from that point on. And you can also edit existing workflows. So this is a simple drag and drop tool where on the left, we have the toolbox, we have system tasks, we have also custom tasks. These are all the custom workers registered in the system and also all the other workflows. So we can drag and drop system tasks, custom tasks, or even sub workflows. So let me just quickly demonstrate that with a basic Lambda task. Let me connect the start, the end. Let me check the configuration of the task. And yeah, let's just leave this as is. Very basic execution. And I can save that and execute right away. So let me fill in the input form. Actually, yeah, this UI can generate a very simple input form for a workflow. It goes through the workflow, scans for input parameters. If it sees the input parameter, it can, put it on this form and ask the user to fill in the parameter. So let me just execute that. And I can open the execution. So this is the execution summary. It has been completed. The single task of type Lambda has been completed. And there's there are some additional tabs here that you can check: inputs, outputs, rerun, the execution flow. Oops. And yeah, you can also go through the individual tasks and see their logs and their full JSON and the summary as well. So yeah, that was the workflow builder. We also have the executed workflows view. And as I mentioned, we can do the hierarchical view as well to aggregate the sub workflows with their parents. That's also very useful, especially when, finding what went wrong when you are dealing with multiple sub workflows. And yeah, then there's some additional tabs, schedules, event handlers, looking at the tasks, definition and polling, and then just some useful information around the workflow execution. So yeah, that would be the brief demo. I just wanted to show that this is also something that we do in Conductor, and we actually didn't have to do any changes to Conductor, really, right? We do have the proxy that provides the hierarchical view, but other than that, this is a UI that can work on pretty much Conductor as is. We are slightly behind the main branch of Conductor. We are looking to update and pull the changes to our fork soon. So yeah, that's the demo. And I think that's been enough for today. So just a brief summary. We do use Conductor at FRINX. We've been using that for actually several years now, and we are really happy about it. And we are really excited to be part of this community and help move Conductor even further in the future. And with that, I think it's back to you, Doug.
Awesome. Well, that was really cool. And thank you for the talk.
Thank you.
So we do have a question. Is your modeler open source?
The answer is yes. Yes, you can find it on GitHub. It's out there, but it is part of our greater UI, right? So you can find it there, but it's not extracted as a standalone tool. But yes, you can find it on our GitHub.
Okay, great. We got asked that both in the chat and in the Q&A. So if it looks like I'm ping-ponging here, it's because it's coming up in two different places. I thought the demo of where you can actually drag and drop and build your workflows was super cool, and I think that's a really awesome feature. So we've got a question in the chat that says, would these tools have some overlap with Apache NiFi, NIFI regarding data flow, workflow, moving data around?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. So I actually don't know.
But
I can look into that in offline.
That's a perfectly honest answer.
Yeah.
I can probably take an answer to that question. Like, if I understand correctly, right? The question is, if these tools have overlap with Apache NiFi regarding data flow or workflow, moving data around. If the question is about core Conductor, I think the overlap is there in terms of like, you can actually use Conductor for moving data around. Probably for the next meetup, we can invite some speakers who can talk about their use cases there. But yeah, happy to talk about this offline as well.
Well, awesome. And again, thanks for the awesome talk. And now we are ready to go into our second talk from Nick at Netflix.